Hello. Today we will have a short lecture on assessment in transpersonal psychotherapy. The nature of transpersonal assessment, you can say. Again, I'm Anthony Glucci, your professor, MA, PhD psychology candidate, Naropa University. All right. So, functions of psychological testing and assessment. Psychological testing and assessment is a commonly accepted professional clinical practice that plays an important role in mainstream psychology by helping therapists understand and describe a client's 1. Current level of diagnostic functioning, 2. Select appropriate therapeutic treatments, and 3. Demonstrate the effectiveness of particular treatments. Right? So we've talked a bunch about testing and assessment as a way to extract information or data from our client to be able to assist them. And initially, what we do with that data is we make a diagnosis of psychological functioning, often using the DSM-5. Then we select treatment options, otherwise known as prognosis, and it's good to have efficacy studies, so to continually revisit the treatment, also to continually revisit the assessment and the diagnosis, but also to continually visit the treatment so that we can get the most optimal treatment for clients ultimately, informed by past experiences. So transpersonal psychological testing is a bit different maybe. So what transpersonal assessment contributes to assessment in mainstream psychology, which is that general extraction method that I just explained, is the systematic application and integration into traditional assessment practices, quote, a model of the human psyche that recognizes the importance of the spiritual or cosmic dimensions and the potential for consciousness evolution, right? So mindfulness and transpersonal phenomena and experiences are included, and abilities are included in this model, the transpersonal model of psychological testing. That possibility, let's say, or that optimism, right? Along with the optimism that we are not stuck, that the illusion is that we are stuck in our current moment of mental healthiness or unhealthiness, which is not the case. Our mental healthiness needs to be continually bolstered, and our mental unhealthiness also needs to be interacted with, or ought to be, and is not permanent. Transpersonal assessment, essentially defined literally, is an activity requiring professional judgment whereby the practitioner, the clinician, and client work collaboratively at arriving at an expanded conception of the client, expanded view of the client, a holistic or integral understanding, including viewing non-ordinary states, transpersonal states, and both their antecedent, all right, what contribute to beforehand, and consequences, what comes after, as potentially, but not necessarily, beneficial, for the purpose of enhancing the client's growth and development of self-awareness and health in this responsibility as a clinician to be a facilitator for the journey as your client goes along a path, their path. Excuse me. The main point of difference between conventional and transpersonal approaches to assessment are that the latter, transpersonal approaches, utilizes transpersonal theory, right? So transpersonal psychological theory we've talked a bunch about, but there's much information about that, and essentially it came to solidification in the 1960s, and we've talked a bit about that as well. And methodologies to understand a client. Transpersonal approaches to assessment requires that the assessor, yourself, the clinician, and the client actively collaborate, right? This is not a one-direction experience. This is a relationship beginning to be built. Transpersonal approaches to assessment emphasize the explicit role of clinician awareness of potential bias and professional judgment used in the transpersonal arena. So within all of the arenas of psychotherapy and all of the approaches, there ought to be, or there should be, an awareness by the clinician of potential biases. And in all of the licensures and certification programs in Colorado, that is a requirement. Yes, you take a specific course, but this is like other practices. The practice of anti-bias in oneself and anti-bias promotion is an everyday practice that is refined over time, that requires patience in oneself and others, only when diligence is accompanied with this, and discipline to that practice of anti-bias work. It is an integral part of the transpersonal approach to assessment, diagnosis, and treatment. But right now we're talking about methods of transpersonality assessment. So many different assessment approaches may be employed in a clinical practice to gather information about human personality and its transpersonal aspects. All right? And there is a blend of traditional assessment approaches with transpersonal approaches. This is not a this or that, one or the other type of situation. This is often, if not always, a blend of methods or approaches. So, in short, you will be using traditional methods of assessment often that you will learn in assessment class, go more into depth in assessment class, with transpersonal assessment approaches and aspects that we will go over today and continue to talk about throughout this course. So, bringing the transpersonal lens to interviews, questionnaires, standardized testing, behavioral observations, physiological measurements, case studies of personal histories around transpersonal phenomena and experience, and life records are just a few of the many sources of information that transpersonal psychologists use to draw inferences about transpersonal aspects of human personality. Right? So you're assessing the experiences that your client has had with transpersonal phenomena and experience so that you are able to inform a diagnosis, yes, but also to ultimately inform a treatment plan on ways that you can assist your client in engaging psychotherapeutically for psychotherapeutic benefit in transpersonal practices or in expanding their perception of practices that they might not currently see as transpersonal into the realm of transpersonal for psychotherapeutic benefit, and many other applications that this information can have in regards to transpersonal diagnosis and transpersonal treatment. Methods of transpersonality assessment. Verbal reports as data is one method. It's a common source of information about transpersonal dimensions of human personality that come from self-report methods, such as face-to-face interviews, essentially, that provide quick and easy access to a person's subjective internal experience, right? So it's based on themselves as the subject. So these are experiences that are coming from memories and feelings and recollections and things to this effect, rather than objective. And internal experiences are subjective. So limitations to verbal reports as data. There are some limitations. Verbal reports are often difficult to interpret and are limited by an individual's verbal skills and capacity to introspect and remember. And as I may have mentioned in a past lecture, when we have a peak experience, a transpersonal experience, or we witness a transpersonal phenomena, or we witness another having a transpersonal experience, there's this peak where it occurs. And as we move in linear time away from that peak, our memory of that experience and our ability to recollect it physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, mentally, intellectually, or through memory, all of these things diminish over time. So there's an importance to, so there's that intersects with this as well. But as an individual or your client's ability to articulate in a way that you can understand their transpersonal experiences also are impacted and are a sort of limitation within reason, especially when they are in an alternative state of consciousness, either in the moment or when they had the transpersonal experience. Another limitation is many transpersonal experiences, mystical states of consciousness, let's say, are often reported as being ineffable, and William James one of the founders, so-called founders of this tradition of transpersonal psychology, at least in the postmodern academy, the way it shows up here in these settings. He even established points of mysticism, and one of them being the ineffability of it, or the beyond words nature of things. So there's just the reality that many transpersonal experiences are beyond words or explanation, and in that way they may appear at first to be unreachable to you if your client has had one of these experiences that are beyond words, especially if you haven't had a similar experience, to be able to literally relate to the experience that's beyond words rather than the explanation itself. Otherwise, over time, the words may come as the person processes the experience or as it's utilized in transpersonal psychological treatment plans as they're going through their goals, their objectives to reach their treatment goals from a transpersonal psychological treatment plan that you will have recommended to them. So, direct observation of behavior is another transpersonal psychological assessment method. To observe people directly in particular settings or situation as a way to learn about why people act, feel, and think as they do during exceptional transpersonal experiences and performance of transformative behaviors. So, witnessing your client engaging in their transpersonal experience, whatever that is, right? If it's profound or more subtle, that's fine. Something more subtle would be like the example that we talked about in class, but the experience of bird watching and intersecting with nature in a way with the birds that goes beyond the normal interaction or experience with other species, right? So that's more of a subtle thing maybe. And then maybe a more intense experience or something to this extent. I don't know the exact term to fit this would be observing people in, ayahuasca experience when they're experiencing transpersonal phenomena and experiencing the phenomena within themselves as well. Transpersonal behaviors. There's a way to witness your client engaging in behaviors that are beyond the norm. So if your client is a medium, observing them in their practice or in their craft is a way to utilize the direct observation method of behavior assessment for assessment purposes. Now, the setting or situation may be contrived. Laboratory setting, you can bring the medium into an office or a lab and bring in people to connect with that medium, to witness or to observe the behavior, or it can be in a natural setting where the medium typically is, or just observing the medium in their everyday experience, not specifically engaged in client-based medium work. So naturalistic observation may have more credibility, however, as a source of evidence if you're looking for evidence to inform your assessment for a particular transpersonal phenomenon. Evidence is not required to be able to engage with your client around transpersonal phenomenon because you are engaged in clinical psychology, not necessarily research psychology, and because of that, this therapeutic aspect of things is relevant. Therefore, the belief is an aspect of the it's a product of the psyche, let's say, and it ought to be engaged with whether you can personally verify the transpersonal phenomena or experience that your client brings to your attention, that they've been witnessing or engaging in or experiencing themselves, right? That being said, if verification is something that is required for some particular reason, naturalistic observation is the most credible form of direct observation data gathering in regards to assessment. But we'll move on, and if you're interested in that, please go back and look at the resource that I had put there, that the information came from. The citation, sorry. Okay, so another method, case studies, personal histories, and life records. So information about the transpersonal dimensions of human personality can be found by studying an individual's life history and biographical record. So that's another way as well. And that can come from medical histories that you might have. It can come from utilizing an assessment form that asks about the individual's life history and biographical record from a transpersonal lens, or respecting transpersonal dimensions, and looking to draw them out. And that's something that, if in your own private practice you have much say in the constructing the assessment interview or form, assessment tool of some sort, another assessment tool of some sort, a test, and you can include questions or inquiries in an interview or in a test or in a form that get at the life history and biographical record of your client to gather that data. Case studies examine the life and actions of an individual in great detail. They reveal the richness and complexity of the transpersonal aspect of human personality. And case study material may serve as a rich source of hypothesis about transpersonal experience. In regards to clinical psychology, the application here is pretty limited, but you can gather information or case study information, quote unquote, from interviews with family members and close friends if you have the consent of your client and if that makes sense in the assessment process. That will form a sort of a case study. However, as always, they are often from retroactive reports. There's memory distortion there as well, and there's that. So we'll move on. A way to think about case studies is that it's about getting multiple perspectives. Yes, is the way that I think it works in psychotherapy from a transpersonal psychological perspective, but in research psychology, it is used to look at, to put into categories people who have had similar experiences, to be able to engage or extrapolate more information about causality and results around the claims of transpersonal experiences and phenomena, or actual experiences of transpersonal phenomena. So the Enlightenment would be an example of that. And as you've been reading through this slide here, in person or in class, we would go over this as a discussion prompt. But here, things to consider. The experience of enlightenment in human personality has been characterized in the mystical traditions as involving a form of heightened awareness, right, during both waking and sleeping states of consciousness, which is interesting, right? And people have claimed that they've reached this state, a decent amount of people. And this state of enlightenment is essentially considered being in this state of cosmic consciousness by some folks, which is essentially defined as operationally as the ability to maintain pure consciousness, or this state of heightened awareness, both waking and sleeping. But to experience that throughout a 24-hour period, right? So that is the barometer for enlightenment. Anyhow, and we were going to talk about is the experience of enlightenment based on case studies, the experience of other people sharing it, witnessing it, and then collecting, categorizing those folks, and then studying the collection. Based on that information, does the experience of enlightenment seem verifiable? Is such a state of cosmic consciousness and human personality functioning, fact or fiction? Do you believe it is possible to experience enlightenment? And what is enlightenment to you? So feel free to engage in these questions during a 5-minute meditation, please. Any one of them, and proceed from there. We can share thoughts next time we meet in person. Okay. So standardized tests, I mentioned, are another transpersonal assessment tool. It's one source of information about the transpersonal aspect of an individual's personality, is a psychometric test, or a self-reported personality inventory, and that's one source. And psychometric tests are ways to look at how the body is responding in terms of vital signs and other signs that you can read with electric energy usually, stimulation, and self-reported personality inventories are things that you can construct yourself, but it is recommended that you use the pre-existing inventories, and I will share a list of, I believe, 30 of them with you shortly. So I will just share this with you. McDonald, Leclerc, Holland, Alter, and Friedman in 1995. Their transpersonal psychology, quote, involves not only the direct study of transpersonal experiences, right, which we've talked a lot about what that is, but also the study of the expression and behavioral, physiological, cognitive, emotional, and sociological correlates of this experience, so how they intersect, a task for which psychometric tests can prove valuable. Standardized measures of transpersonal constructs can be utilized effectively to support transpersonal theory. So essentially, when you find something that works, and if it happens to be verifiable through psychometric testing, are verifiable based on consistency of standardized test results, please feel free to share it so that it can continue to add to the quest to be legitimized for the transpersonal psychological therapeutic perspective. Not that it's not legitimate, but it still is seen in many ways and by many institutions as a more fringe or alternative approach to psychotherapy. And we'd like to see that change. So having verifiable evidence that certain assessments and diagnosis and treatments utilizing a transpersonal psychological lens are successful, are helpful in terms of assisting with mental unhealthiness and shifting towards mental healthiness will be incredibly helpful for legitimizing this field. So self-report personality inventories, specialized questionnaires that require individuals to respond to a series of items in a variety of possible formats. Right? So these are things like, please, on a scale from 1 to 5, this, that, or the other. Right? So that's a way to assess transpersonal, utilizing a transpersonal psychological lens. That's another tool for assessment. To draw out information about transpersonal experiences and phenomena that your client has observed. And again, there's going to be examples soon and resources for you of a variety of assessment tools that you can use. And they're usually scored on a number of dimensions or scales to reveal the personality pattern of a particular individual. So another standardized test of sorts, as with psychometric measurements in psychology, the assessment of transpersonal constructs and phenomena must address certain issues. So I figured I'd point out psychometric. It's a field of study within psychology concerned with the theory and technique of measurement. Psychometric generally refers to specialized fields within psychology and education devoted to testing, measurement, assessment, and related activities. It's about data and verifiable data engaged much in the traditional scientific method. However, the point here is that there are certain constructs and phenomena transpersonal psychotherapy must address certain issues as psychometric measurements address, which is reliability. We want to make sure that the assessments that we are making are reliable, that they're leading to accurate diagnoses, and we want to make sure that our treatment plans are reliable as well, but we'll get into that as well in the future when we get into transpersonal psychological treatment plans and things we can do there, which we've kind of been engaging with throughout the semester. Content validity, right? So adequately operationalizing the construct in terms of the behaviors and verbalizations that truly reflect the phenomena or construct. So being accurately reflective of what's going on, not embellishing or under or over exaggerating. Concurrent validity, the degree to which the test score is related to the same standards or criteria measure obtained at the same time. Does this test or assessment tool actually relate to what we're looking to extract, which is information about transpersonal phenomena and experiences that our client is experiencing, and maybe even particular ones as we go further into treatment. Predictive validity, the degree to which the test score predicts some other criterion measure. How predictive are our tests? Are they actually accurately leading towards a specific assessment that's accurate over time? Construct validity, adequately distinguishing between those who are known to have the experience and those who have not. So doing due diligence, and again, being genuous, not disingenuous, in reflecting data. And response bias, so adequately distinguishing between those who have had the experience and those who have not, but who say they have. So not being led by our first instinct on what our client is experiencing, but actually listening fully to our client. Yes. That has a lot more implications in research psychology. In clinical psychology, I would go so far to actually challenge the response bias that I've posed here. So I'll challenge myself here in the lecture, and say that you do not need to distinguish. Actually, you ought not to distinguish between those who have had the experience and those who have. I believe in the therapeutic implications here are that you engage with your client based on what they believe, the self believes in that moment in time, and how it impacts their mental healthiness. So there's that. So we could go further into this, but we will not for today. I've gone over those. So here we go. There are 30 existing transpersonal self-report personality inventories that can potentially guide further assessment and research into the transpersonal dimensions of human personality. So these are essentially assessment tools, and not essentially, these are assessment tools for you to use, questionnaires, scales, and different things that we'll go over a few of them, I'll just read out a few of them. You can, there will be resources and links to all of them online. And on the online student platform for you to have access to prior to the end of the semester. And we will be utilizing some of them in class as we are with the Turgeon scale regarding hypnosis as well. So that will be fun experiential activities for in class. But these are mostly for you to have resources to have test and approaches to share with your clients that are experiencing certain things. So for example, there's an East-West questionnaire, a death transcendence scale, let's say, a holistic living inventory. We have intrinsic religious motivation scale. We have mystical experience scale, right? Paranormal belief scale, phenomenology of consciousness inventory, psychomatrix spirituality inventory. We've got, self-expansiveness, level form, self-transcendence scale, right? So there's self-transcendence scale, spiritual well-being scale, which is helpful, spiritual assessment scale. And what I will say is that the plead is that please involve, these assessment tools. These 30 is the plea by researchers and clinicians that have integrated with these in the past, because the more we continue to use the tools that we know are helpful and that are working, the more that we can continue to legitimize these tools and to legitimize transpersonal psychological assessment. So please, if you must, and all clients are unique, of course, make up your own assessments and personality inventories. You will find others. There are a plethora of them. There are templates for constructing them. But these are the ones, the 30 that I place here and that you will have access to online. These are the ones that are promoted by the academy, by academic settings, by doctors, PhDs, clinicians, who have been working in this field for many, many years. Well, something that's interesting just to talk about. Transpersonal traits and states and the differentiation between them. So you will be observing in your client are through a variety of methods we've mentioned, states that are directly available to awareness and can be experienced. Okay, so something that they've been aware of in a moment, and then traits, whereas they are not directly available to awareness because they are not currently occurring. So traits are regarded as being more enduring, whereas states are relatively less enduring. So states are kind of like that peak experience that dissipates over time, whereas traits are something that you engage in or that you embody, um, maybe as a result of being in a transpersonal state, maybe not, or being in other states, non-transpersonal states. And often as a result of being in transpersonal states, a transpersonal trait will come along, will result from that, right? So let's say the experience of having a transcendent experience in nature can lead to a trait of a love and care for nature that you may not have had before that transpersonal state occurred. So, traits, a couple things about them. They cannot be seen, heard, touched, tasted, or smelled with the outer physical senses, but that leaves open quite a bit more to interact with them. They are constructs whose existence we infer from verbal reports of private experiences via first-person self-report, right? So a trait, like I'm now mystically connected to nature, and I can feel the energy and the pain of trees as a result of having a transpersonal, being in a transpersonal state for a period of time. I now have this trait, right? We are inferring those traits from listening and from self-reports from our client. And we are not distinguishing whether they are verifiable or not, because we are not research psychologists. But in the research psychological world, they will be doing that. And that does, at times, inform your clinical practice. So I thought to mention it here. Oh, sorry. Let me. Okay. So a question I was going to ask is, can a transient and time-limited drug-induced experience of the sacred state, right, of a enlightened state, let's say, of this heightened awareness, produce an enduring and permanent religious or spiritual life trait, right? So does some transcendent experience or phenomena lead to some transcendent or permanent impact on one's life that they incorporate as a trait? So that's something for you to think about. We get a bit more into traits here. And quantification. And mainly what I want you to take away now is that not everything that counts can be counted. And not everything that can be counted counts. So how that relates to therapy from the transpersonal lens is that not every observation that you have through the various methods of assessment actually inform the assessment, the diagnosis, or the treatment. So not everything can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts, right? So that's how to utilize that in that way, just to keep open to the freshness and the arising. Kind of stumbled on that quote there, but that's fine. But be open to the freshness and the arising, and some things will work in one moment and they won't in the next. And so be patient, but be diligent when things are unsuccessful and don't lead to more mental healthiness for our clients. Okay, let's see. I think we'll... So, This is a Malone and Ward quote, which I'll talk about briefly before we almost wrap up here. But literally, any method the examiner can use to make relevant observations is appropriate in psychological assessment. Now, this is within reason, of course, but mostly what I want you to take away from this is not literally, as it says in the quote, but that be open, right, to diverse approaches and flexibility, right? So sometimes assessment might occur in a field with fireflies, right? Sometimes assessment might be a long, drawn-out process. Sometimes it might happen quickly. Trust yourself as a clinician, and be open to a variety of methods to be able to extract this data from your client about transpersonal experiences, phenomena they've witnessed or experienced, to be able to assist them. Okay? Walsh and Vaughan have a lot to say about the transpersonal discipline, so look into them as well to inform your research and also your paper defining transpersonal psychology. And let's deep structural analysis is something Wilbur proposed that is one way of engaging with assessment in different stages of consciousness. So please come back through and look over this yourselves in the PowerPoints. But for now, we will I think move on for the day. This is all we need to... Oh, we'll conclude here. The Intelligent Absorption Scale, and the rest of the presentation we can do more in person, but the Intelligent Absorption Scale correlates positively with transpersonal experiences. And this is something that we're going to do in class, next class, as an experience together. These questions here, what assessment method do you prefer, or what you think about assessment, is a question that I'd like you to ponder. And are there limitations to transpersonal assessment as it presently stands? And how can they be overcome? Are questions I'd like you to pose ultimately about the shortened version of this lecture for the sake of time. So hopefully you've stuck around for these 40 minutes. I meant to make it 30 minutes. I apologize. I will see you all in class next Monday night. Be safe, drive safely, have fun, and that is all.